Well, hey, thanks again for checking us out for Triple Play. As you'll notice, my co-host is missing today. Scotty had cover for his office, so we'll do without him on this episode, but we got a great guest, and we're looking forward to that. Don't forget to support those that support us. We have Resource One and their team. If you have any financial planning needs, make sure you guys are giving them a holler at 636-458-1798. And we also have CS Design. They do our intro, outro, the website, all that good stuff. Great guys, and highly recommend them. 573-436-3717. If you guys need any of that kind of stuff, make sure you're reaching out to them, and we appreciate that. Also, make sure you're checking out our merch. We got signed balls, we got hats, T-shirts, all that good stuff. Make sure that helps out in supporting everything that's going on with Triple Play. And, if you guys, I've been getting a lot of feedback on guests. If you have a guest you want us to reach out to, let us know. We're excited to reach anybody. We've had some pretty cool conversations, got some really fun interviews coming up. We're trying to land and get some things together that I think are going to be way out of the box for me and Scott, but we're going to enjoy it anyways. So all that said, today we have Jeremy. Jeremy has a ministry called REThink, and we're going to learn about REThink. We're going to learn a little bit about your testimony, because I know that's kind of interesting too, and dig into how God is using his ministry and how people can help support it, or maybe some of their own to it. So
yeah.
So give us a little bit about yourself, Jeremy.
So, well, where do I start? You mentioned testimony, so maybe I'll give the abbreviated short version.
Yeah.
It plays into why I do what I do with REThink 315. But when I was a kid, I didn't really grow up in church, but I had been exposed to some Christian ideas, Christian principles. I mean, like a lot of kids in the late 70s, early 80s, like I knew that, or I had heard that there was a God, that he had a son, right? His son's name was Jesus. And then my grandma had this picture in her living room of Jesus, who, was like blonde haired, blue eyed, nice tan. Grandma also told me that Jesus wanted to live in my chest for some reason that I couldn't quite understand.
Yeah.
And that was like, that was my understanding of Christianity, right? We'll call it Christianity light.
Yeah.
And then, as I got a little older, of course, I started just really wondering whether or not that was the whole story. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't believe, but what was hard for me to wrap my head around was the notion that God was good, that God was for me, that God even really knew me, cared about my mom. Like I had a pretty rough upbringing, not as bad as some, but far worse than others, right? Like somewhere in the middle. And
were your parents together, or?
No, good question.
Yeah.
My mom didn't marry my dad. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know who my biological dad was until I was 15.
Oh, wow.
And my mom was a beautiful woman inside and out, but just had a lot of wounds. And later, it's probably safe to say, although she wasn't diagnosed, that she probably had some pretty significant mental health issues.
Okay.
And various addictions and some self-destructive behaviors and all of that. And, after, the third boyfriend, first husband, and I'd seen my mom get hurt in every way you could imagine, right? I don't remember exactly how old I was, but with a wicked stepdad living in the house, I think I was in grade school, hearing fights, hearing awful things. And, I don't want to be too graphic, but I mean, the worst of the worst. I would pray every night, like, God, just let them kiss and make up. Please. Like, please. I'm not asking for a new bike. I'm not asking for anything, even from myself, other than like, I just want my mom to be okay. And those prayers weren't answered, at least not in the way that I'd expected as a kid. And I just concluded that my prayers weren't making it past the ceiling. And if they were, God didn't care.
Oh, okay.
That was my big objection to Christianity. This is part of the reason why I do what I do now. I had this objection to Christianity, and it was a stumbling block. It was a roadblock. It was making it hard for me to see Jesus clearly because, even though this experience, it was a reasonable conclusion, right? As a kid.
Well, yeah.
And yet it's not the truth. Like that's not really what the Christian story tells us. And so growing up, getting a little older, by the time I was in high school, I was always kind of a mischievous kid. I would like probably like you, man. I liked pranks. I'd sneak out. I'd be out all day doing wild stuff, but it was always just good natured. It was fun. It was mischievous, but not malicious.
Right. I mean, and I think our generation did that a little more.
They did.
I tell my kids some of the things. I'm like, you guys could never do this, but in the back roads, we would take the stop signs down.
Yes, exactly.
And we would, TP the whole class's houses and
Gen X for the win.
Yeah.
But in my scenario, in my situation, when I got into high school, about sophomore year, I think I just went off the deep end. And part of that, was I went from a small town to a big city. But another part of that was I deeply felt like God did not care about me and my mom. And there were all kinds of, goofy dudes in and out of my mom's life. And I saw things that, kids shouldn't really see. And now I'm getting a little older too, and I'm distancing myself from childhood, ideas and superstitions and naivete. And you could even say optimism, right? I was really losing hope. And I just started behaving badly. So my behavior graduated from mischievous to malicious. And then my theology graduated from Christianity light to what I felt like was just solid objection, right? Like I could stump my Christian friends with this. I don't want to be, this is what I would say. I don't want to be a slave to a distant God who doesn't care about me and my mom and really seems to just exist to enforce a bunch of dumb rules that are designed to keep me from having fun. That was it, man. That was my slam dunk, right? And I would say this to different Christians in my world, and there weren't a whole lot of them actually, which is sad. But that was my big objection, right? If I had back then, if I had social media, that would have been my post every day, right? To all the Christians that tried to get me to go to church or whatever. So, fast forward, man, and sorry, I'm taking a long time to explain.
No, this is good. Okay. So, take as long as you need.
Well, so I get, and again, my testimony really does influence the kind of work I do today. So I guess it's relevant, but I got in a lot of trouble in high school. I always got in trouble, but like I said, it used to be mischievous. Now we're breaking the law. I'm skipping school, selling drugs, doing drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowd, discovered, girls and all of that. And my life was just spiraling out of control. I got arrested for fighting when I was 15, spent the night in juvie, got arrested for fighting when I was 16, spent a week in juvie, got arrested for, you guessed it, fighting when I was 17. And this time around, I really hurt somebody. And it's not that I'm such a tough guy. In this situation, a friend of mine and I, we were in an unfair fight. I mean, it was us two versus, there's 7 or 8 of these guys. But wrong place, wrong time, wrong motives. I'm not a victim here at all.
Right.
But man, I ended up hitting somebody in the head with a bat, and I almost, which is funny because we're in a room filled with all sports memorabilia, right? It was an aluminum Easton. I don't remember how long it was, but it hit him hard, and he almost died. He did, and again, we were all in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong motives. And, in hindsight, I was trying to protect my friend.
Right.
But at the same time, man, bad application, right? Like,
Right. Well, and as you said, the better thing would have not been there, right?
indeed.
So,
Indeed. But it was weird though, because, you know, as a kid, I'm like in my little pea brain, I'm like, okay, I got 3 options. I can jump out and I can fight and protect my boy, Dave. Dave, if you're listening, I love you. Or we still talk a lot. Like we're still friends. And
that's awesome.
yeah, it is. And I'm 44 now, man. It's a long history. But anyway, in my little pea brain, I'm thinking, man, I can either jump out with my dukes up like 30 style boxing, and I could, you know, I can help my friend, but also get beat up, right?
Right.
Or you know, maybe I could just go into the driver's seat and just drive away, peel out, and leave my buddy. Or I could run. You know, I mean, you know, there's only so many options. And then the last option was, I could grab this little bat that my boy keeps in his little, you know, blue Geo Metro, and I can jump out and maybe try to even the playing field. And so that's what I did. And this kid almost died, and I'm so thankful that he didn't. And I was in jail for a year and a week. So I was gone for a while, but that's where I got saved.
Okay.
So, you know, and God's kind of upside down.
Yeah, the trouble led to this path that he was opening up, right? So
Yes.
he allowed you to kind of go down the path, and does that to me all the time. I always tease people that, you know, especially for guys, it seems like we got to be body slammed to get you know,
Yep.
got to get our attention a lot of times.
Us, yeah.
So, and then of course you brought up the Geo Metro, which I have all sorts of fun memories of Geo Metros, because growing up there wasn't too many cars that you could pile everybody in, and it could literally get like 50 miles to the gallon.
Right, and they were inexpensive and, you know, somewhat reliable, right?
I remember piling a bunch of us in them, and we did some cross country trips on them in college there, and they were fun. So
They were, yeah. But anyway, man, I'm in jail. And, you know, like a lot of kids growing up without a real positive male influence, I believed that, you know, saying yes to every dare, like chasing and catching lots of girls, and also like fighting, right? I thought this was how I proved that I was a man, to myself, to the world, to my friends. And I, you know, learned that wasn't quite right. Learned the hard way.
Do you think the fighting was also maybe a mechanism to make sure nothing that would happen to your mom would happen to you? I think of that when you were saying it. That's one of the things that came to my mind is like, I'm not going to allow myself to get hurt like my mom, and so I'll be a more aggressive person to keep that from happening to me.
Josh, I think that's a really good insight. Yeah, I think that's part of it for sure. I don't know if like I verbalized that or was aware of that, but yeah, it was some of that, because I even remember, you know, part of the reason why I wanted to stick up for my friend was because I just had this inflated sense of like justice and fairness, right? Like, you know, I saw my mom being hurt by someone who was bigger and stronger,
right?
And worse yet, was supposed to protect her, right, and love her. And so, yeah, man, I was, again, I probably lost more fights than I've won. I'm not a big guy. I'm not a super scrapper, but just had a big mouth.
Right.
Had a lot of friends, and a lot of friends with older brothers that would back me up if I needed them to. And, yeah, so I got in a lot of fights, but yeah, I was angry for sure. But you're right, man. Like I did want to stick up for the underdog for sure.
Yeah. I would definitely think that sticking up for the underdog, making sure I'm not getting hurt.
Yep.
So I'm going to be a lot more aggressive than, you know, so that stuff doesn't hurt me. And maybe even in your mind, maybe one day I'll be able to take care of that guy who was, you know, if that kind of person ever comes towards my mom, I'll be able to handle it next time it happens.
100%. Not to mention, I was moved around a lot, so I was always the new kid at school. So, you know, you got to learn how to stick up for yourself, or at least how to maneuver social situations, you know?
Absolutely. And you said, too, that you were into like skateboarding and biking a lot.
That's true.
And of course, you know, when you said that I always, growing up in that age, they were always usually the mischievous ones.
Seems
a little bit.
Seems true, yeah. I mean, it's a different culture now, right? Now it's like everybody's into everything, but... Yeah, man, when I was a kid skateboarding, and I'll, you know, finish my story and tell you how I actually learned who Jesus was for real. But yeah, like a lot of kids from broken homes, a lot of kids that didn't feel like they really fit in, a lot of outsiders, rebels, you know, artists, nerds, geeks. a lot of us just found skateboarding because unlike traditional sports, you didn't need a team, you didn't need a coach, you didn't need any money to like buy equipment. Well, that's not true. You needed money to buy the skateboard, but
there's one big investment. You could work a summer and mow yards and get your board, and then you had wheels to get places.
That's right.
If you couldn't afford a car.
Exactly. Not to mention, you could wheel and deal and do some trading, whatever. Like there was just ways to get a skateboard. It was easier, I think, to get into, and more appealing to people like me at the time, just because it's like, man, I don't want to be on a team. I'm not a team player. I'm a rebel at heart, right? And I like to go solo, and I hate coaches, and I don't trust authority, and I've never seen good authority, and I don't like teachers. I mean, that was my attitude, right?
Right.
But that skateboard, and I still feel like, even then, even in my most rebellious years, like God was just pursuing me, chasing me, giving me gift after gift, grace after grace. I mean, I spent like 7 years under let's say, authority of a very abusive stepfather. So it was, it was like kindergarten to 6th grade. It was a long time and really formative years for me. And I was scared of this guy. But when I started BMX riding and like, riding dirt trails and stuff, and then when I really got into skateboarding, man, it gave me an excuse to be gone.
Yeah.
I was just every day, sun up to sundown, like even in the cold, man. I remember I'd bundle up. I'd put on like 3 pairs of sweats and 3 pairs of socks. I'd just be out all day. So skateboarding in some ways really protected me and gave me something to look forward to, taught me, almost all the most important lessons in life, like outside of Christianity, I really learned from skateboarding, right?
Right.
You fall down, you get back up. Like you're only limited by your own discipline and perseverance, right? And it's just you against the board, or in that, some cases like you against the world, and you're only limited by what you put into it. So it was really cool and really helpful and definitely a beautiful thing. And I still do it from time to time. And, I've got all the knee surgeries and broken bones and slip discs to prove it.
But every now and then you got to grab the skateboard, do a little ollie, and have a little fun.
It's in my trunk right now. We'll go push around in the parking lot after this. But anyway, so in jail, sorry, just to bring this like full circle or close the loop, I got saved, man. I don't know how else to say it. Like born again, regenerated, made a decision for Christ. Like it doesn't matter how you frame it. Like I just, through reading scripture.
So was that required that you're reading?
Not
scripture?
at all.
How did that come about?
Yeah, good question. And I read every book in the county jail. Like, and I was there for a long time waiting for a jury trial, like kind of a long story, but I read every book there. And
because what else are you gonna do, right?
What else are you gonna do, man? I was working out, watching TV, just farting around, but there just weren't a lot of options. And I like to read anyway. I've always been a reader. My mom really instilled that in me at a young age. But I started reading scripture, and honestly, I don't remember if because I was going to church too, and it started out like it was just an excuse to like get out of the dorm, get out of the cell, out of our little day room area.
Sure.
But I wanted to be there, and I liked being there, and I felt something good was going on there. So I don't know if those 2 guys used to come see us, Lonnie and Elmer, but I don't know if those guys encouraged me to read scripture or if I just started reading scripture. Like I can't remember the order.
Okay.
But around the same time, I was going to church, and I started reading the Bible in the New Testament. And by the time I got to the 15th chapter, 15th verse of John's Gospel, like right then and there, I believe, the way I remember it, I believe that's actually what saved me, in my opinion. And for those listening, just to paraphrase, that particular verse in that particular chapter goes like this. Jesus is talking to his buddies, and he says, I no longer call you slaves. Slaves don't know what their master's up to. Like, think about it, guys. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, think about it, guys. Like, slaves don't know their master's business. He said, but everything that my Father is telling me, I am telling you And I'm not calling you slaves. I'm calling you friends.
Mm.
And my, like my Twitter bio at the time, right? If I would have had Twitter or something back then, was, I don't want to be a slave to a distant God who doesn't care about my mom, doesn't care about me, and just enforces all these stupid rules. And I'm telling you, like, Jesus, through the red letters, he read my mail, he answered my objection, and in the way that only Jesus can do, like he offered a response or a word back or a defense or an explanation, right, to my objection, which is what Christian apologetics is.
There we go.
So there it is, by way of a super long, I hope not boring introduction.
No,
that's my story. That's my testimony.
So you get saved there. Obviously, they probably saw a change, and then right in the juvie that you were at, or the jail.
Well, I was tried as an adult, so I was in an adult facility, and I served my time with adults. I mean, there were other kids there my age, right, 17, 18. But maybe they saw a change, maybe they didn't. Inside there's this cliche, right? It's the jailhouse convert cliche. Okay. Where everybody gets converted in jail if they think it'll reduce their sentence or get them privileges or get them out early, right? Whatever, So, so for me though, I knew something changed. Again, I had been rebelling against God. And by the way, a lot of unfair circumstances, a lot of bad choices. Only God knows the exact ratios. Right. But early in my life, it was probably more unfair circumstances. And then the older I got, the more it was like more bad choices, right? Okay. But those things go hand in hand. And so I had been rebelling against God for so long, and I had just silenced my conscience. Like if there was a Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder at any time, like I had squashed him, right? Or at least just, stuffed him down into my pocket so deep that I couldn't even hear him anymore. Gotcha. I was the kind of kid, and I'm not glamorizing this at all. Like this is still a deep source of like pain for me, right? But I mean, I was terrible. I was terrible to my mom. I was terrible to my grandmom. They were both like my grandma, the closest family I had, the people that cared for me the most, that raised me, basically. I was very mean to them. I was, not very great with my friends. I mean, I'd sleep with my buddies' girlfriends. I'd steal from people. I was dishonest. Been kicked out of school, right? I was one of the worst kids I knew. That's amazing. And when I got saved, something just happened. It was a miraculous power encounter with the Holy Spirit. There's no other way to describe it because my heart just changed. It's like the Grinch who stole Christmas, man. Like if you would have given the Grinch the choice, hey, you want to be nice to these Who's? Like he'd be like, no, I don't want to choose that. Like that's ridiculous. Why would I want to do that? And yet something changed. His heart, right? The story says his heart just grew. How did his heart grow? I don't know. It's a little bit of a miracle, right? Like is it something that he chose or is it something that happened to him? Yes. It's hard to explain. Christianity's hard to explain in that way. And I feel like God just did something and I responded to it and it was beautiful. And so many things about me changed like overnight, miraculously. And then of course, Jeff, a lot of things didn't change. Yeah, no. So, and I was going to get at it. So you come out and now you've got your friend Dave. You brought him up earlier. Does he notice a change? Yeah, I would say he probably did. And a lot of that was, even on the inside. So the people, the officers and prison guards and whatnot, they don't know my story, right? So they're not seeing any significant changes or at least nothing measurable. But my friends and family knew something changed. Okay. For sure. And a lot of that was, through my letters, through my repentance, apologies, confession. I was also going through the AA program and NA as part of, my recovery and that, played a significant role too in a lot of the changes that were happening. But my higher power was God and certainly, as seen and demonstrated in his son Jesus is, in his life, death and resurrection and all that. But my point in bringing all that up is just to say that, to your question, lots of things changed, and I knew that it was miraculous. I knew that it was God. I knew Christianity was true. I knew Jesus had saved me. I knew I had the Holy Spirit. But then there are all these things that like didn't change so quickly, right? That I had to actually work at, and it had to actually kind of cooperate with God, and some of that stuff still hasn't changed, right? Like we're all works in progress on this side of eternity. But when I got home, it was kind of like a hey, thanks Jesus for the grace. Now that I'm home, I'm just gonna go about my business. And I'll call you when I need you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'll talk about you. Like, I'm not ashamed of you, right? And I actually want people to know that part of the reason why I am different now is that, because you've saved me. And I was pretty vocal about it, but, I was still hanging out with the same crowd, doing some of the same things, slipped back into some of the same patterns.
Gotcha.
It wasn't until my my early, almost mid-20s that I started really taking Christianity seriously.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is when I really started attending church regularly, when I stopped doing drugs and alcohol, like even having gone through AA and NA while I was locked up, as soon as I got home, I was like right back into that.
Gotcha.
A lot of that was self-medication, and I know a lot more about my own story and about addiction and trauma and all of that now than I did then.
Right.
But at the same time, it was, it was a lot of, bad choices, man. Like I was just making really bad choices, and I knew better, but I was really interested in self-medicating. And so, fast forward, I think I'm, maybe 23.
Okay.
Right? So I got saved at 17. I got home. I was like 18, almost 19 when I got home. And, for a few years, just kind of one foot in, one foot out. Like I wouldn't steal anymore. I wasn't lying anymore. I wasn't like trying to get with my friends' girlfriends. I was trying to be a really good dude. I got a job. I moved to St. Louis, I got a job here. I was working hard.
And where were you kind of from, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, I don't mind at all. Illinois. Yeah, so not far, just a couple hours up 55.
Okay.
And St. Louis to me was basically the closest city. It was either Chicago or St. Louis, and I knew a couple people in St. Louis. That's actually part of the reason why I came here was some good friends brought me here, and yet like I'm here in some ways, like for the wrong reasons, right? Like I'm like, oh, well, I get to skateboard in a big city, and I have better parties to attend, and easier access to drugs and girls, and better, more job opportunities. So my motives weren't the best, but God certainly had a plan, because I'm so glad to be here now. But anyway, just maybe fast forwarding a little bit, God got my attention initially, like you said, by body slamming me. It's true.
Yep. That's how us guys learn. Guys got to body slam us a lot of times.
That's right.
To get our attention.
Yes. And then the second time around, it's not as if I got like resaved or something, but the second time around, after breaking my collarbone skateboarding, after my, for me, it's my, semi long-term monogamous girlfriend broke up with me. For good reasons.
Right.
After getting laid off from my job and having a very good friend, overdose on drugs at a club. And he didn't die, thank God. I do have friends that have died, but this guy didn't at that time. He was later killed in a car accident. It's a separate story, but one of my best buds overdosed. We went to see him. He's, he's hooked up to machines. We didn't know if he was going to make it. All of this happened. It felt like in the same day, but it was probably in a couple months. And after that, man, I was like, okay, my boy Thomas is not much different than me. He's a good dude. Like he's not trying to overdose. He's got a decent job. He's got a girlfriend that he loves, he's trying to be a decent guy.
Right.
And he's here in ICU, and he could die, right? I was like, man, I got to get my act together. And I remember going home that night and just crying out in my front lawn, just, Jesus, I know you didn't save me for this life. Like, I got off the path. and I want to get back on, right? Like this is how I framed it in my head.
Right.
All along, right? God never left my side, and God knew what was going on, and it was part of my journey. But at the time, I'm just like, Jesus, like I've lost my way. I need you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And I didn't hear an audible voice, but I knew for sure that God was just saying, like, clean up your act, get to church, like, you know what's right. Like, there's no new revelation here. Just do what you know is right. And that's when I really started going to church and really started being zealous in terms of holiness, as best I could, right? I know I'm not perfect, but personal holiness. And so is the internal. And then external, I wanted to evangelize. I wanted my friends, people that I loved, people that I cared about, I wanted them to know the Jesus that I knew, right? And that's how I got into apologetics. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't even expect to talk about all this.
No, this is all good. So I do have a question. So as you're starting to go to church, and I'm hearing this, one of the things that comes to my mind, and you tell me if this plays out in yours, is often that a lot of people think, hey, you say a prayer and you're saved. And what I often find is that there's usually a point where you bend your knee and you acknowledge you need to be saved. Okay, and so I call that usually the initial introduction to, hey, I'm saved. But then there always seems to be, and this was true in my life, I find it a lot of lives, down the road, the spot where you realize there's this lordship. Okay, like he's Savior, but he's also Lord. And I have not really lived a life where he's the Lord of my life. And that's the part where the obedience starts to come in, like, okay, yeah, I was saved and I know I need Jesus. I agree that he's the only way to get to heaven. But now I realize that there's also this requirement of me being obedient and walking, and that he's not a joy kill, that these rules aren't there, like for me to not have fun, but they're there to protect me.
Yes.
Okay. The fun on the other side has consequences. And those consequences is what he's trying to save me from. It's kind of like, I look at it like if my 6-year-old or 7-year-old decide to hop in my car and take a joyride, he would probably kill himself. So, and the car would be destroyed because he's, not equipped mentally, physically, all those things to be able to drive. Right. And so, I kind of look at Jesus as often like that too, is, hey, these are boundaries, and then you kind of come to this part of lordship. And that's kind of what I was wondering. Is that kind of how you see that the part of your story a little bit?
Well, I certainly don't disagree with anything that you're saying, but
and that doesn't have to be your story. I just was curious because I hear that and I'm like, okay, he's saved right here. And then now his friend and all that comes out, and it's like, man, I need to start living this obedient life.
Yes,
and
100%.
That falls into this lordship area.
Yeah,
maybe not consciously deciding like, hey, he's my Lord, but realizing I'm saved here, but now I need to start to live this life that reflects that.
100%. Yeah, you're right, but I feel like the Christian life, as I mature and I learn more and I become more aware, there's one pastor that put it like this: I'm aware that I am more sinful than I ever feared, but I am more loved in Jesus than I ever dreamed. And every day, like I'm experiencing this gospel, right? This is the gospel over and over and over, right? And so I agree with you, but I feel like it's like an everyday thing. Like almost every day, I should be feeling the way I felt like in my front lawn, saying, Jesus, I need you, I need you, I need you. I can't do it. I'm not perfect. Even my best efforts fall short. But on the flip side, the way I felt, like when I got saved really is like, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
You did it for me. I am loved. Like I am valued. I am seen. And despite my, my issues, like you are for me. You are good. You've demonstrated that. And so I'm not saying that everybody has to have like a reconversion experience every day. That's not even what I'm talking about. I feel like I've been saved since the minute God changed my heart. But at the same time, it's almost like you have to realize you're a sinner and submit to his lordship, like consciously all the time. Like you have to remind yourself, right?
Right. I think you're talking about, that process of being a disciple, right? We call it
Yes.
sanctification.
That's right.
Where he's constantly revealing our sin to us, and we're constantly realizing that sin and confessing it, and hopefully working on correcting whatever action is leading to that sin.
That's right.
So,
yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely. I was just thinking more of from the salvation point of view. I often, when I hear people's testimonies, not all the time, but often, they're like, well, I'm not sure if I was saved here or here. And often I'm like, probably the whole thing. That was probably a process.
Yes.
Because there's this process of mentally getting it, and there's, then it's got to make your way down to your heart, and then it's got to be reflected in your actions.
Yes.
And of course, as you said, we're not all going to be saints right away, right? That's not our best 5 minutes, even as believers, is but filthy rags before holy God, right?
Right.
And so for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, as Romans says. So, like we've all fallen short. We fall short every day. Our best 5 minutes don't measure up. So when we come to that realization, we're, as Jesus said, you don't want to look in the mirror and not see the blemish, right?
Right.
We want to see the blemish and confess it and ask God to help us to address it, because in our own power we'll fail anyways, right?
Right.
So just like going to AA is it can be a great program, or recovery, all these different programs out there. They're good programs, but they're only as good as you allow God to work through your life.
That's right, man. Faith is only as good as the object that you put your faith in. And you could put your faith in AA, and you could even see some decent results, but your faith is better placed in the ultimate true source of like healing, right? But yeah, so all that.
Well, and even like when you sit with AA, not to get off on a little thing,
that's okay.
But we'll explore this for a second, because I often notice, like, one of the things I notice about those who are, let's call them not believers, but people who are successful with a thing like that, okay?
Sure.
Often take those same tendencies and place them somewhere else, because they've never been really addressed at the spiritual roots. So they just become, they take the same addictive nature they had with alcohol, and now it becomes an addiction with sports.
Sure.
Or sports betting, or
making money sometimes,
or
being the world's best dad. Like, it's not always a negative thing.
Right.
Sometimes it's some other thing that you make your God, which gives you what you think, meaning, hope, purpose. Yeah. That's the tricky bit about idolatry, right? Anything that you put in the place of God is going to overpromise and underdeliver.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But sometimes you can see some results. I mean, and this is another part of like my testimony, and it feels like we're all over the place, but maybe we're getting to the point, because that's what I had to explain to my friends in my evangelistic zeal. I'm like, guys, Jesus changed me.
Right.
And my friends were like, hey man, great for you. Like, we're so glad you found religion or found Jesus. And if that works for you, man, that works for you, which is, a very common, answer to, the cultural questions, right? Whatever works for you, right? Like what's going to work? Whatever works. That's just the way it is. And people have a relativistic ideology about, it's more of like a pragmatic approach. It's like, if it works, it must be true. True for you, but not true for me. But if it works, it's good for you. And so I was running into this a lot in the early 2000s. Like, when I was really starting to talk to people about Jesus and Christianity, and it became very clear to me that as I read the New Testament, and as I just thought about like how on earth I could even convince anybody that this is true, it became so clear to me that I can't just ask people to borrow my experience or to even borrow my faith. And I can't just rely on this idea that it will change your life positively. Though I do believe that's true. What's the difference between Christianity and like hot yoga, or Christianity and Oprah's Book of the Month Club? Because people have testimonies after they do those things too, right? And there's positive change. Like, you could see people that they get a good counselor and positive change. And so I'm like, well, how do I even go about talking about this in a way that might make more sense to my non-Christian friends. And this is where I discovered this, old dusty branch, right, of Christian theology known as apologetics. And I discovered C.S. Lewis and later on down the road, other apologists. But God literally directed me to a thrift store and a book called Mere Christianity. It was my introduction to apologetics. I picked it up on a whim, just thinking, well, that sounds interesting. And I think I've heard of this Lewis guy. Didn't he write kids' books, right? And I read it and I was like, this is it. I started using things that I was learning in this book to talk to my non-Christian friends, and was seeing better results. I'm not saying that everybody got saved immediately. I'm not,
Right. But you're starting to see that they're now starting to, their wheels are starting to turn a little bit. They're not just giving you the brush off hey, that's good for you, Jared. Thanks very much. I'm going to go over here. But now they're, that's kind of, okay, well, they're starting to get that inquisitive.
That's right.
I do that. I do that a lot. I go to my big area of sharing my testimony and talking to the gym. I hang out with all these guys at the gym every night, almost of the week. I'm there for an hour to 2 hours easily, sometimes longer, because I've done everything from praying with people in the middle of the gym to inviting them to church to whatever God has. But and you get to know people, but you got to have that relationship. But then you start to have these conversations, and apologetics is spot on how you start to get those wheels turning, because everybody. I always tell people in our society, everybody's got to feel good something. It feels good. And we're all about feeling good. And that's why you're like, hey, that feels good for you. That may not feel good for me. But hey, if you like spicy chips, I like, sweet and salty. That's great, man.
Right.
That's your deal. And that's cool. But when you start to go in and start explaining, hey, there's a little bit more to this. And have you really given this thought,
Right.
And you start to just open those doors of thought, because most people just haven't. I think a lot. Our culture here in America is one that everybody thinks they're religious and nobody is religious. They'll say, well, and I mean religious in this fact that, well, I go to church, so I'm a good person. But even then, if you really start to ask, well, what does your Catholic Church really practice or believe? They couldn't tell you. They could tell you maybe a few things like they learned from confession, or what, maybe they did something as a kid. But when you start to talk to 90% Baptists, whoever, they'll be like, well, we're great at sharing you're talking about Jesus, right? And you're like, okay, but what did the Baptists believe that you agree with? They couldn't even tell you from a doctrine, and I say doctrinal for those who are listening who may not know what doctrine is. That's kind of a belief system within, these are the scriptures that we tie our thoughts and firm our beliefs around.
Yep.
And so all that said, you kind of get those people who couldn't tell you even some of the basic stuff, like like my parents grew up Baptist. I go to Baptist, or they grew up Lutheran, or they grew up Methodist,
or non-denom, or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they just kind of, or maybe they found it in college. They got in a group that was some cool guys, and hey, that was cool, and I'm doing it now. But then you start to ask them any questions, and it's my greatest concern, because what you do with apologetics is also what we need to be doing every day in the church, which is discipling people.
Yes, 100%.
Every man in the church should grab a young man in the church and disciple somebody in that church one day a week.
Yep. And I actually, I'm so glad you mentioned that word discipleship, because the more I experience this world and trying to walk out my Christian faith in this world, and I go to church and I run a ministry now, and it's like it's so weird. My life is so weird, and yet words like discipleship, evangelism, apologetics, spiritual formation, we act like these are all these different programs and these different isolated sort of expressions of Christianity, and it's a very compartmentalized, programmatic approach. And it's like, whoa. This is the Christian life.
Yeah.
This is how you work out, right? What to be true. This is how you live out from this new place of revelation and spiritual engagement. You're a Christian now. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I bear witness to what God has done for me. And it means that I surround myself with other believers. And I as what is it? 242 says, you devote yourself to the apostles' teaching and to prayer and the breaking of bread and the sacraments and prayer. And this is church, right? This is fellowship,
Right.
and this is all about talking to people about Jesus, answering questions about Jesus, loving God, loving neighbor, becoming more like Jesus. Like, this is the Christian life, and none of these things can really be separated from the other. And this is why I love apologetics, because you can't do discipleship without answering questions. You can't do evangelism without answering questions. You can't do spiritual formation without answering questions, or outreach, or Grandma Edna's knitting club, or whatever it is. Like,
Right.
you gotta answer questions. And that's all apologetics is. That's the whole point of our ministry. REThink 3:15, which is a riff on 1 Peter 3:15, which, as you probably know, is like the apologetics proof text. Always be prepared to give an answer to anybody who asks you for the reason for the hope that's in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And this word apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia. It's used like a dozen or so times in the New Testament. It's often translated to give a defense, but it can also mean always be ready to give an apologia, a defense, or an explanation, or an answer, or a word back, which is
Right.
the most literal translation. So we don't have to think about apologetics in terms of, because that word defense sometimes has this like courtroom.
Right,
sort of
Phil. Yeah, because we're
vibe.
in America, right? We
Yep.
think of it things in the way that we've experienced things.
That's right.
So,
And also, that's some of that is the church's fault. Some of it's the fault of guys like me in this industry, right? Or in this Christian subculture who have, for a long time treated apologetics as if it's only for academics, debaters, argumentative types, like that's sort of the Christian subculture of apologetics. It tends to attract those people. And we've reduced apologetics in a lot of ways to certain scientific arguments, certain philosophical arguments, certain historical arguments, when at the end of the day, it's like, it can be that. It's not less than that, but
Yeah.
it's so much more. Like, if somebody asks you a simple question and you give them a simple answer, you're doing apologetics. As soon as you open your mouth to answer a question about Jesus or the Bible or your faith or your church or whatever, as soon as you open your mouth to answer a question, that's apologetics. That's it.
Yeah, and it should be intertwined. It goes back to when I think of discipleship, I think so often we think of like teaching somebody, like I do a craft, I'm going to teach this person how to do a craft.
Apprenticeship.
Yeah. And
a little bit different.
Absolutely. Discipleship is helping young people or even old people, okay, but helping people better understand the walk. And it's mentoring in the faith to a degree, but it's also helping them, understand why they believe what they believe. So, and be grounded,
Yeah.
And, Jesus said, go and make disciples. Discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't go say make church members, go get confessions. So, and I think there's an important key to that of,
Right.
Of doing that. So you're saved. You've come to this point in your testimony.
Yeah.
So now, how do we tie that to this 3:15? So how do you get the vision? You start reading apologetics with Mere Christianity, which is one of my favorite books.
Yes.
C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite authors.
Oh, I love it.
And of course, everybody knows him from the Narnia books.
Yeah.
But I always tell people, if you enjoy those, you also should read his space adventure ones.
The space trilogy is fantastic.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't read that. So
Yeah.
a little plug for CS, even though he's dead.
That's right. And by the way, this is, it's such a side note, but speaking of the space trilogy, especially right now when people are very curious about like UFOs and aliens and the possibility of life on other planets, there are lots of opinions on that inside and outside of the church. That's not my point. My point, though, is that for Christians like Lewis, when he was wondering about life on other planets, instead of being like super fearful and legalistic and dogmatic, he was just confidently curious. And he wrote the space trilogy just thinking about, hey, what would that be like if humans aren't alone? And everything's created by God. So what if God created other races and life forms? And again, it's just a thought experiment. Those
Yeah.
books he's not building a new doctrine, right? It's just a thought experiment. It's confident curiosity. And he ended up writing, I mean, the first two, I think, the last one fell a little short for me, but the first two, I think, are two of the coolest science fiction fantasy books about life on other planets, right? And what would it be like if these other races and beings never fell?
Right.
In the first place, they didn't rebel against God, and life's perfect for them. What would it look like if you take a fallen person and put him on that planet? Like that,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. But yeah, C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites. So glad you love him too. We'll trade Lewis quotes later. But so when I moved to St. Louis, because I like the sound of my own voice, because I'm an extrovert, because I can be persuasive, I landed in the sales world.
Okay.
You can respect that probably in your line of work, but I started out kind of low level, and by the time I was 30, I mean, I was selling like litigation support technology to law firms, and I was walking into conference rooms with senior partners and IT directors and firm administrators, and I'm selling like very, very expensive things, right?
Okay.
And I thought I had made it. I was like, this is so cool. And I was going to church regularly, at the time. Things seemed to be going super smooth in my life, right? And I just thought I
love that word seemed. Like it seemed.
Yeah, I'm careful with my words.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was going smooth, and perhaps it was for that season, but I joke around, right? Because God has such a great, first of all, he has a providential plan. He's such a wonderful chess player. Moves, right? Like
Right,
sees
right.
the end game. And all these years, I'm learning how to sell things, and I'm learning how to craft an argument, and I'm learning, and I'm not perfect at this. There are people better at it than I am. But this is like part of my job, right? Is to talk about something and to answer objections about it, answer questions, and so I'm doing this in my career, and then I'm having lunches and meetings and building relationships with non-Christians, and I wasn't like the guy, standing at the cubicle, like with a bullhorn talking about Jesus, but I always would try to just slip in these little nuggets and drop hints and plant seeds. And whenever I had the opportunity, if somebody would be like, hey, you talk about things that you do at church, or you sometimes slip in that, you're a believer, or you'll talk about a Bible passage. I'm curious about that.
Right.
Sometimes it's positive. Sometimes I just got people that just wanted to argue, but I'm wired that way. So I didn't take that as a threat. I'm like, hey, cool. I like that too. You want to debate? Let's go debate. Let's have lunch,
Yeah.
And so I'm doing this in my career, like almost as a hobby.
Right.
I mean, I had clients, man, that are still atheists. And we're friends on Facebook, and like, we're cool. We're buddies. And we still have like debates ongoing that started, back in 2008 or whatever.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's so cool. And I love it. And I always want to be the guy that doesn't shy away from the truth, that doesn't water down what I believe. I mean, I'm a Christian, card-carrying Christian. I even believe the weird stuff, right?
Right.
And yet, like, I'm fine with people that have different points of view. I'm really cool. As a matter of fact, I appreciate different points of view to the degree that I can even talk to somebody that has a point of view that's different than mine, and I can say, so I don't agree with your conclusion, but if I were in your shoes and I grew up the way you grew up, and I experienced what you experienced, and I read what you read, I'd probably believe the same thing you do, right? Like,
right.
And were it not for Jesus and God's grace invading my space, who knows what I would believe, right?
Right.
And so I love conversation. I love dialogue. And I'm doing this professionally, like selling stuff. Sorry, I'm doing this as a volunteer, basically. And professionally, I'm selling things to attorneys. And then suddenly, like, my life just takes a sharp right turn, and there's a whole series of interesting events, but I end up in the office of an attorney. I won't mention his name, but he's a Christian. He's a guy who spends a lot of his money helping to fund different initiatives on college campuses, but also within like Christian ministries. And he's a good dude. And were it not for him, who knows? I may not even be in ministry, but we talked a lot about apologetics. We talked a lot about young people and how difficult it is for them to make that transition from high school to college, especially church kids, and how, the university life is not all bad, but there are unique challenges there, right? And
Well, I mean, they're going to question your beliefs. I mean, you're going to walk, even the Christian ones today, vast majority of them, by and large, you're going to walk in, and even if they think they're teaching truth, I say this even at Christian colleges. I went to a local Christian college, and when it was still super conservative at that time, and we still had some professors that made it through the filtering process
Right.
and started teaching and had some really out there thought processes and had to be removed. But, and thank God I went to college and acknowledged it when it was brought to their attention. But today, a lot harder to do that. A lot of those stay, they get tenureship, and they continue those bad theological teachings or, worldly teachings if you're going to a state college. And then you got a bunch of them that sound like they're Catholic that have been taken over by the state. I mean, we can go... Some of them that are Baptists that have been taken over by the state.
Yeah.
There's a whole slew of them out there that started one way. I think a lot of them started with good intentions, and then over time, and then now we're getting to a generation of people who have been taught poorly who are now teaching, and so it's like the poor student now is become a worse teacher, and so
it's a common theme for sure inside the church even. But certainly in, academia. So,
well, how many churches have a great college ministry unless they're on the college?
Right. Yeah. Well,
I mean, I'm all over St. Louis. I have a lot of friends. Again, went to Moab, know a lot of pastors in the St. Louis area.
Yep.
How many of them have a top-notch college ministry? Very few.
And it's hard. It's a hard demographic, right? Because, as you said, at that age, in that season of life, it's actually... And I think maybe I'm reading into what you said, but I think you would agree. It's actually pretty natural for kids to start questioning stuff and try to figure out, like, what do I believe and what sort of ideas and values from like mom and dad or from my family system am I going to keep and own? And what ones am I going to maybe discard, or what ones are going to morph a little bit, right? Or evolve or whatever. And I think that's actually really healthy and natural. Like, some people are very scared of deconstruction. Like, that's like the dirty word now in evangelicalism.
Yeah.
And while I understand why that word is scary for some parents, I think it's actually very natural and very healthy to, as you're becoming an adult, you're becoming your own person, you're moving out on your own, like, this is part of the journey. You actually should deconstruct, but with healthy boundaries and guardrails, right? And do it in a way that is constructive, not destructive, right?
Right.
Deconstruction's not a bad thing, especially if you started building on a shaky foundation, right? Even in the church sometimes.
Well, sure.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm sorry, I talk so this is fun. Like, thanks for letting me just blab here, but
I love it. Yeah, this is what we do. Me and Scott to go in different directions all the time. He'll usually throw a curveball out in the middle of nowhere that you're like, okay, well, we'll go down that little rabbit a little bit. So,
well, I'm in good company then. And so I talked to this attorney. God bless him. I'm very thankful for him. We don't work together anymore, but this guy essentially got me started in ministry. I mean, if it weren't for him, God's providence notwithstanding, if it weren't for this person, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing. But after talking with him, having experienced what I experienced, the stuff that I was doing on the side, and I forgot to mention, Josh, like, as a volunteer, I'm having meetings and doing these sort of like apologetics, evangelistic luncheons with people.
Right.
But also on weekends, I'm a big brother mentor at a skateboard park.
Oh, there you go.
Dude, it was, I mean, even to this day, I love my job,
awesome.
But it was some of the funnest, most fruitful times, right? Because I'm working with kids that reminded me of me when I was that age, and I get to ride with them. I'm getting beat up with them, and I'm becoming a bit of a big brother, sometimes even father figure, for better or worse. I didn't do it perfectly, but I really loved on those kids, and I saw a lot of fruit. We were doing Bible studies on Saturdays, and it was like this deal where, you get to skate for free if You hang out for the Bible study.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to become a Christian. You don't have to give any money. Like, just be respectful for 20 or 30 minutes, and then you get to skate for free. And I loved this ministry. So I had this big heart for teens. And then I was at my church at the time. I was volunteering in youth ministry as well. So again, all this volunteer stuff, which I really enjoyed. Like, it just brought me so much joy and fulfillment. And I didn't mind making money.
Well, yeah, sure. You gotta make money to pay the bills, right? And
Indeed.
And so, it's a transition to ministry.
Oh
So,
boy, you're not kidding. And hey, for those of you that like what we're doing over at Rethink 315, rethink315.com/donate. But anyway.
Oh, just so you know, and you brought it up, so I'm going to plug this in. It'll be on the show notes. So if anybody wants to do that, you can hop on the show notes, click the link, and you'll be able to go there. You can support
Amen.
the ministry. You can sign your own kid up, because we're going to get into a little bit of what.
Yeah, we'll talk about the camp. How much time do we have, by the way? Sorry, we've been talking a lot, but
we're fine.
okay, cool. So, so my volunteer world and my professional world just collided. And again, if it weren't for this particular attorney, this wouldn't have happened, because he created an opportunity for me to transition into full-time ministry.
Oh, that's awesome.
Not just him. I mean, there was other people involved, but
he was your
the
primary
catalyst.
guy. Yeah, you got to have that one guy who knows that has your back.
That's right, man.
And is going to take make sure that you can pay your bills and meet your landlord's needs, right?
That's exactly right. And so I made that transition. And the funniest thing is, like, I used to try to convince attorneys that business as usual wasn't working, and they needed to rethink a thing or two, right? About not law necessarily, but how you practice. Same thing now. Like, I try to convince pastors and parents and Christian educators not to rethink the fundamental truths of Christianity, because those don't change, but to rethink how we apply them, how we talk about them, how we live them out, specifically in terms of how we define and practice apologetics.
Right.
And this is like why I do what I do now. But I transitioned into ministry, and I absolutely loved it. But like everything in my life, man, like I'm in some ways, not that it was all bad, because there's a lot of fruit, a lot of good, but I kind of lost track of lost sight of my first love, which was, I just want people to see Jesus clearly.
Right.
I just want to move roadblocks out of the way so that non-Christians or hurting Christians or doubting Christians can just see Jesus clearly.
Gotcha.
And then I got a little too invested and involved in like the apologetics subculture in the American evangelical church. And, you start hanging out with PhDs, and you start talking science, and you start talking philosophy, and you start talking history. And, you got a couple of people showing up to your programs. And then the next thing a couple pastors are calling you, asking you for advice. And,
right.
And you just get a little caught up and swept up in the business of it. And I think, Josh, I lost for a few years, not forever, but for a few years, I lost sight of my first love, and I became more interested in numbers and like success, right? But
right.
Christian success, whatever that means. And I really, 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 really overemphasized like being right. I just wanted to be right. One time I had a counselor tell me, he said, Jeremy, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And it was a marriage guy, right?
Yeah.
And of course, because I'm such a smart aleck, I said, well, being right makes me happy. So now what? And, he's like, get out of my office. No, just kidding. But I'm just that, I'm wired that way. A lot of thinkers, a lot of apologists, theologians, really people with my personality, maybe yours, I could tell a little bit. We do like to be right. We like the truth. We want to stand up for the truth. We want to convince people of what's right. And we have, good motives. And yet sometimes we could be more in love with being right or the arguments or the, the art of persuasion. And we can kind of forget, like, what are we doing,
Right.
Yeah. And so I just, again, I don't want to, mislead your listeners at all, because I'm so thankful for every minute of ministry that I've ever been able to experience, and everything before that,
But
too.
you know what? If you came in here and told me life has been hunky-dory and I've never had any more issues since ministry.
Yeah, you'd suspect I wasn't truthful, right?
100%. 100%, because I get calls all the time from men in ministry who have no one else to talk to, but because I do finances or they know I'm a trustworthy person, they'll call me. Everybody goes through times or lulls in ministry. It could be just, maybe it's overwhelming from people. Your church is going through a season, a lot of needs, a lot of deaths, weighs heavily on you.
Yeah.
And you just feel maybe depressed or pressed down upon. Maybe you're not spiritually, maybe you're not depressed like that, but maybe you just feel like this heavy weight has been put on you. And, sometimes it could be getting caught up with the art of numbers, like, hey, I'm looking at all the numbers, and they need to be reminded that it's not all about the numbers, that,
right.
God gives you exactly what you need, whether it's 12 or 12,000.
That's right, man. That's right.
I always there's a good story that have you ever read the book Finishing Strong?
I don't think so.
Highly recommend it. Okay. And there's a story in there. He starts out, and it's really at the beginning of the book. He starts out the book and he says, when Billy Graham was an evangelist, on the list of evangelists, he was like number 8. He was not big. He was really small, pretty much unknown. There were much bigger guys going around doing all these tent meetings and revivals and things happening. But Billy's dedication to the word, whether 10 people were in that tent or 100 people were in that tent, being faithful here, being faithful here, being faithful here.
Yeah.
5-10 years later, all those guys that are ahead of them, every single one of them, out of ministry, most of them were alcoholics. They were left their wives, their family, whatever. Just one bad story after another in the book. Billy, faithful. Just continues to be faithful all the way.
Yeah.
100,000. I'm going to share the gospel. I'm going to be faithful. 1 woman, 0 women. I don't do that. My wife only. And he just kept walking that faithful walk that God had led him down. And so the book goes into the next part. He goes, John MacArthur goes to, I think it was Ireland or Scotland. It was one of those. And he's doing a little conference in the 80s. I guess there are maybe 90s, and in this book, and this guy comes up and goes, "Hey, when I became a believer when your dad was here." And he goes, "Your dad came with like 3 men and did this stuff here." And he goes, "How's your dad doing?" And he goes, "My dad's great." "Well, how are those other guys doing?" And they both felt, again, the faithfulness. And of course, the point of the book is how do we live out our faith from beginning to our last days here on earth?
Right.
Finish strong. The name of the book.
Run the good race.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you're saying that reminds me of hey, we all go through the laws, but how do we go to the Lord to confess them?
That's right.
Turn it over to him and realize that hey, we were just trying to do this again in our own strength and
our own strength. That reminds me of what you were talking about earlier with regard to accepting Jesus as Lord, and then later accepting Jesus as Savior first, and then later as Lord. And I think that it really is like something that we have to do in a lot of different ways all the time. And what I've noticed is that in different seasons of my life, there's certain areas, right, or compartments. And I'm like, yes, of course, Jesus is Lord over this compartment. And then I'm not quite submitted to him in these other areas. And sometimes I don't even know it. And sometimes I kind of do. And maybe there's some self-deception or whatever. But for me in ministry, part of it was my own pride but some of it was ignorance too, because I was surrounded by people that they made room for these metrics, right? And the metric was, if you can help kids learn how to like demolish arguments, right? Which that's a scripture, right? We demolish arguments. If you can help them to learn how to demolish arguments and be better debaters, and if you can also raise funds, and if you can pack, not stadiums necessarily, but meet your number, right? Whatever that number is, and these are the measurements for success. And for me, like a lot of other things in my life, like God just gets my attention in these wild ways. And so I'm not saying that that God's purpose in the pandemic was to just get Jeremy's attention. And I'm not even saying that God is responsible for that in a causal sense, although he's God, so there aren't any memos that don't go across his desk. We all know, right? He has purposes, he has plans. There's things that he ordains or allows for reasons that we don't know, right? We don't understand, but we know he's good. Anyway, you didn't need that disclaimer, but in case your listeners are confused,
that's good. I do it all the time.
Yeah. So COVID just threw everything upside down, and there were other things that happened before COVID for sure, like my favorite pastor in town, like my guy, right? My church, the place where I landed as a 20-something and felt I was at home, good spot. I love this place. My pastor, I won't mention his name, but he was asked to step down for bad behavior, and he later took his own life, and it was just devastating. Not because we were so close, but because he just represented something to me, right?
Yeah.
And
he was a good friend of mine.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So So yes. So that hurt. Prior to that, I went through, and we're talking like within a year, I went through like an unwanted and unexpected divorce. I didn't see it coming. I should have, because I wasn't the world's best husband, but I was blindsided. And that hurt, right? And I'm remarried, right? And I have, I have 2 beautiful stepchildren and a biological kid, and all 3 of them are my kids, right? And
right.
And I love my life, and I'm so happy for God being faithful even through the hard stuff, right? And redeeming hard stuff. But, my pastor, kind of tanked, a guy that you and I both know and love, and and then, went through this situation, and then I tore my ACL showing off for my buddy's kids on the trampoline. Like, it wasn't even a cool skateboarding story, right? I'm just trying to do a backflip, for goodness sakes. And I should have known better, but, cause I had some other knee surgeries, but I really did it this time. And then, I had a couple friends die, and all this was going on, in this short season. And it really made me rethink the way that I was doing ministry. And honestly, man, it made me rethink a lot of the stuff that I associated with Christianity. There's a lot of good in all of the things that I was involved in and thinking and believing, but there was some stuff that I really had to, in my own way, like deconstruct and then reconstruct. And so this ministry is in a lot of ways, like it's an extension of everything I've ever done, but I'll say it this way. You'll appreciate this. It's almost like, because I worked for a different organization for, 10 years. And again, good organization, good people. But through COVID and other circumstances, like I got laid off, and I found myself without a job in the middle of a pandemic. And it was almost like, the record label, me and my team, right? Like the record label, they put together this band, and that was me, and that was my friends and my, speakers and people that I was associating with. And we had this band, and the record label and the band had a great relationship. And then, for all kinds of different reasons, the record label said, look, it's time for us to part ways, right? Love y'all, but we're going in a new direction. And again, the pandemic played a huge role in that. But, so I just kept the band together, and we just started our own record label. And that's this ministry, is REThink 315. And now we play the venues that we like, and we only do the songs that we like. and
Right.
we have, control and our way of measuring success. We try to like live in the tension between two extremes. Because on the one hand, it's not just all, oh, whatever will be, will be. If God wants this thing to be successful, he'll just drop it in our lap. Like, we know we have to work hard.
Right.
We know there's work to be done. We know
Always.
that we got to get out there and move and shake and grind and talk to people. And there's lifting, right? We do some work, and we're not scared of numbers, but it's not our primary motivator.
Well, sure.
We have a great team of people. We have my board, all of our speakers. Like, I feel like we're in such a good spot in that, even though we're seeing a little growth, which is awesome, like that's not why we're here. Like, if it's 30 kids for the rest of our ministry, that's fine. If it's 30,000, okay. I don't necessarily think that's the direction that we're headed, but whatever God wants to do, whatever God wants to do. So there's that, right? There's the numbers bit, and then there's the trusting God bit, and you live in the tension between these.
So what exactly is three? For those who are listening,
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about now we 30 kids. What does rethink 315 actually? What is it? What is it? So
Yeah. So by way of a long introduction,
no, that's
it's a parachurch organization. We are local. We're right here in St. Louis.
okay.
But we serve churches, like within like a 100-mile radius, let's say. Currently, we've been around for almost 3 years, and we are you could say an apologetics ministry. Some people think of us as a youth ministry. And I don't correct people, right? Like that,
Right.
Those are both good answers. But our mission really is, the short version of our mission is to just help Christians of all ages to see Jesus more clearly. And we want to help young people to think through and seriously consider what they believe, why they believe it, and why it matters. And we want to help the people that love young people. So while we do focus on teens and even early college age, I spend a lot of time with youth pastors, parents, educators. And so, that's our mission, right? We you could say it's an apologetics ministry, but really it's just, we want to move roadblocks out of the way, whether that's intellectual or emotional or whatever. Like, we just want to move these roadblocks out of the way, these objections, these questions, these doubts, so that kids can see Jesus more clearly. Christian kids, non-Christian kids, hurting kids, doubting kids, whatever it is. That's our mission. The way we do it, though, is actually pretty cool. I'm so happy about our methodology because it's simple and straightforward. We survey churches. We get a read on the kinds of doubts and questions that the young people have, and it's a free service. So we'll in any church that wants to use our survey, happy to give it to them. They share the data with us. We print out a very robust report.
Okay.
That gives a pastor or a youth pastor some insight into like what these kids are like worried about, or what their objections are, or what their doubts are, or if nothing else, the questions that their non-Christian friends are asking them, and they wish they had better answers to. And so we do these surveys. We do as many as we can. If anybody's listening, free surveys, love to help you. And then after that, we print out this report, and then there's a next step, and that is, if you want, we know some wonderful authors, professors, pastors. We've identified certain topics here that you probably want to focus on based on your surveys, your anonymous surveys, right? Kids don't put their names on here, so they're honest. And if you want, like, maybe we can set up something at your church, a mini conference, a Wednesday night event, even on a Sunday. And maybe we can just bring in a couple of teachers that are experts in these fields, that love Jesus and are super smart, and they love young people, and they can answer some of these questions, and they can interact with your audience, and we can create a space for questions to be asked and answered, right? That's the apologetics piece.
Right.
And I love doing this. The first year, we did, like a dozen events. Next year, we did a little more. This year, I mean, we're on track for almost 24 events, and I'm
Awesome.
so excited. Yeah, and it's so much fun. And all kinds of churches and all kinds of sizes, in all kinds of, let's say like formats. But the main thing is connecting the right teachers with the right topic at the right time. We're happy to help in that regard. Sometimes that's free. Sometimes there's some cost involved.
Sure.
Case by case basis. And then the last thing is our summer camp. So again, surveys, special events, and then our summer camp. Our summer camp is kind of like our flagship event, right? That's
Right.
what we're known for. And this is where we get, as a certain number of kids. I think this summer we're setting the cap at 50. So we're going to get 50 kids, 20 plus teachers. And these are authors, pastors, apologists, professors, experts in their fields, well respected, well known. And we get all these speakers and all these students in the same room for 4 days and 3 nights with breaks. There's fun, mixed in. It's actually a lot of fun. We have a lot of cool things lined up, but our focus is content and conversations. And we want these kids to be able to, without reservation, with total freedom, to ask any question they want to ask and to get really good, really honest, biblically faithful, but just good answers, right?
Right.
And it's so much fun. And this is, because of COVID and because launching the new ministry, the last 2 summers, we didn't exactly do a camp. Like we did these student retreats, which were cool. It's kind of the same format, but we're so excited to be back on campus now because we're at St. Louis University. We don't have a direct affiliation, but we have use of some really cool spaces.
Awesome.
Yeah. Lecture halls, cafeteria, recreation areas, dorms. So we want our kids, and by the way, we're calling it REThink College Camp.
Okay.
And it is aiming at college-bound Christian teens, right? And we want to give them a college experience, but it's like a safe environment. Like we're going to challenge them. We're going to scramble their eggs a little bit. We're going to, introduce them to different ideas and opinions. And when it comes to the essentials of the Christian faith, we all speak in one voice. All of our speakers, our board of directors, our friends. But when it comes to some of these outer circle conversations and these non-essential issues, we like to show students that there are lots of Christians with different opinions, and that's cool, actually. Like these are things that are hard to understand, and there's different interpretations, and different churches dice these things up in different ways, and here's different perspectives. We want to teach kids how to think, not what to think, when it comes to these debatable matters, right? There's certain things that all Christians believe, you and I know, right? And then yet there's a lot of things that it's these open-handed issues. So,
well, you got to have your core values of, without the core values, you're not a believer, right? I mean, you got to have the core values. Jesus died on the cross. There's certain things that without a question, those values, the Christian faith falls apart without them.
That's
if you don't believe in the death, if you don't believe in the resurrection, if you don't believe in the process of salvation, those things are non-negotiable. Then you got what we were talking earlier, theology, your belief system from the Bible.
Yep.
And somebody once told me, you hold to the cross tightly and you hold to your theology a little looser.
Yeah, I like that. I heard somebody say it a different way. You'll probably like this too, that, you hold the truth in a tight fist, and you hold your methodology in an open hand, and even as the guy that you and I both love, as he used to say, like there are tight-fisted essential issues that you do not compromise on, and if you do, you're not even a Christian. So don't call yourself a Christian. But there are so many things that you can hold in an open hand, these open-handed issues, and again, different churches dice those things up in different ways, but we like to focus on what we call mere Christianity.
No.
And that's what's fun about our camp is, for some of these kids, man, Josh, it's so cool when I see kids that maybe grew up in a certain kind of church, and then they meet kids from different kinds of churches, and they say, wait, we agree on a lot more than we disagree on.
Yeah.
And by the way, like, I think what you believe is kind of interesting and cool. And, like maybe I don't agree with it or maybe my church doesn't agree with it, but we agree on the important things. And so we're brothers and sisters and we're all family sitting at the same dinner table. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to kick you out of I'm not going to kick you out of the kitchen just for having a slightly different view on this other thing. Like this is a family conversation, right? You're not going to get kicked out of the family for having a slightly different view on this unimportant thing, or maybe less important, right? But
Yeah. I
this
mean,
is one of the. Oh, go ahead.
no, you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm listening. I'm just agreeing.
It's like I didn't even realize that this was part of like the secret sauce of our summer camp, but the denominational diversity that these kids get to experience. Like on the one hand, it's a great prep for college because college is a really diverse place. You're
Right.
going to meet people with lots of different perspectives from lots of different backgrounds. In our camp, there's an introduction to this kind of diversity, but it's safe. It's like these are all, for the most part, we do sometimes have non-Christians at our camp and we welcome them. We love having them as long as they're respectful, right?
Right.
But for a lot of these kids, it's like, wait a second, you mean Christianity's bigger than like what my mom and dad said? Oh yeah. It's bigger than what my pastor says? Oh yeah. It's bigger than what my denomination said? Oh yeah. Like that's fun for me when students suddenly get a more global perspective and a historical perspective on the church. Like
Yeah.
for 2,000 years, man, we've agreed on a lot more than we've disagreed on. And there's a continuity, and the church is way bigger than the little bitty slice of it that you experience. Even if that slice is awesome and beautiful and fruitful, like there are Christians all over the world that look different than you, worship different than you, they speak different than you, right? And yet they love the same Jesus.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you go to other countries, you never hear like the Methodist Church, Baptist Church. It's just the church usually.
A lot of times, yeah.
You go to a lot of countries and they don't have denominational. That's not the question. They don't go, hey, do you go to the Baptist Church in town or the Methodist Church in town or the Lutheran Church in town? They go to the church that's in town.
Sure.
So sometimes there's two.
Yeah.
So, but usually it's the church. So
well, and where Christianity has been around for a long time and has established a footing and an anchor, that's where you sometimes see. It's so sad. Like you sometimes see more division creeping in. I'll be cautious how I say this, but it's not easy to be a Christian in America right now. Like it's not as socially acceptable as it once was, and
Sure.
a lot of culture. You talked a lot about earlier about like cultural Christianity and people that just kind of go just because it's the thing to do, or maybe they don't want to upset grandma, or maybe they have some sort of superstitious, like religious sort of, well, okay, like now you don't have to go. Like you
Right.
really don't. As a matter of fact, like why go? If you don't really believe it, why bother, right?
Mhm.
And what I've noticed, and I'm not a historian, I'm not that well versed in all these facts and figures, but it seems to me that when you look back at history, whenever the church gets really popular, gets really big, gets a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of influence, suddenly, like she gets kind of fat and kind of heretical and kind of divisive and kind of corrupt. And in some ways, like Christianity actually thrives or does. Like, Christianity is more genuine when there's some degree of persecution. I'm not wishing that on anybody. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But like where it's hard to be a Christian, I think you see a more vibrant form of Christianity.
Well, sure.
But and I forgot. Oh, when you were talking about in certain countries where they don't talk so much about the divisions and the different
They
denominations.
just don't have it. They just have a church, like that's just people show up and they come over here and they go, people are like, so are you Baptist? Are you Methodist? And they're like, I don't know. I went to church.
That's right. I just love Jesus, man.
Yeah,
Jesus saved me. Yeah.
Yeah, take me to that church. So take me to the church where Jesus is at. Like that's
Yes.
It's very interesting how that dynamic is more American and somewhat European than it is world,
Western, right? Yeah. And, and it's not to say that, it comes all throughout the New Testament, right? I mean, half of Paul's epistles are saying there's bad teaching out there.
Yeah.
Like, watch out. Like, there's divisions in the church, and there should be, because some of you are wrong and some of you are right. But what Paul was talking about was really core essential issues. And so, on the one hand, it's like, of course you need to debate, and of course there will be some schisms and divisions, but man, like, there's certain things about Christianity that we can and should debate. And then there's certain things that we just, like somebody said it this way: with the non-essentials, debate it, but don't divide over it.
Right.
Or another way to say it is, in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. Right. I love that quote. And anyway, sorry.
No, that's good stuff. So Rethink, parachurch, working with youth pastors, apologetics, do the camp, and they can reach out anytime to you guys through your website. Is that the best way? Or Facebook?
Website is almost always better.
Okay.
And just real quick, it's www.rethink315.com. There's a contact button. It's pretty self-explanatory. If people are interested in our summer camp, there's a camp button. If people are interested in, maybe supporting the mission, there's a donate button. But if they want to know about surveys or special events or anything else that's going on, just go to the website.
Okay. So if you're one of my friends and you're listening in on this and you're in youth ministry or associate pastor or pastor, you're seeing this like everybody else, like we got great students in our church, but we're afraid they're going to go to college and maybe walk away from their faith or never own the faith. This might be a great opportunity for you guys to consider, just bringing in another person outside to kind of help you fine tune those kids or figure out where maybe, as you said, the surveys, where the issues may be. So that way when they go to college, they go to their high schools even now, and they're being told, this isn't right. This is not, they can stand firm and be respectful to the educator, but also stand firm on their faith and not be swayed. How many kids leave for college and come back and have disowned the faith anymore? I mean, it's astronomical.
A lot of stats out there.
A lot of them, and we used to think that they were dangerous 20 years ago, and now it's 20-30% up the pole now from where we were. So it's really. And the other part is people used to kind of come back when they'd have their kids, but now we're also like encouraging this culture of not having children.
Sure.
It's all about you. If you're paying attention to the news, the population has been popping up more and more, how we've got population issues throughout the whole world, from Japan to China and America. So, these are things that, may not you may not be on the forefront of your brain, but you need to be thinking about, because
indeed
we want to plant seeds everywhere we go, that evangelism, and help them, grow in any way we can, and let God do the work that only God can do.
Yeah, I can tell we're coming to a wrap, but there's something that you said, and I think it was even before we even turned the mics on, but you were talking earlier and you just mentioned it again. It reminded me about, kids got to hear it from other sources. It's so funny. You're a dad. I'm a dad, right? I could tell, I have a 14-year-old, right? I could tell him all kinds of things and give him like really great advice, and it's just in one ear, out the other. And then one day he'll be back. He'll come back, from some friend's house or something he heard at school or something he read online, and he'll be like, "Hey, did you know blah blah blah? Like, I've got this new idea. It's so cool." And I'm like, "Bro, we just talked about this last week. I just told you that this was a good idea and you didn't listen to me." And it's like, he's got to hear it from somebody who's not me, right? And so one of the things I always tell parents and even pastors is like, most of the stuff that we're talking about, you've already addressed it in one way or the other, right? And yet, for students to hear it from outside sources, it is like the surround and conquer, right? It's the Christian community echoing what you've already said, or at the very least, the best of what you've already said, right?
Well, and I think it gives credibility too, the fact you guys are bringing in authors and teachers from other areas.
Yeah.
There's some more credibility in there. We're going to have next week, we're bringing in a guy, if all goes well. He's supposed to be here, I think, Tuesday, who's like a huge expert on dinosaurs.
Interesting.
He's coming in town for Marv's St. Louis creation, and they generously said, hey, he's going to be in town for a couple of days. Would you guys like him? So we got that guy coming through, and we're going to be getting into dinosaurs, but he's an expert. He has spent the last 20 years. He's an engineer, knows ins and outs of that. For me to try to talk about dinosaurs compared to this guy, we're going to be on two different fields.
Sure.
I think they're cool. I think they're really fun.
Yeah.
I agree they're biblically out there, but this guy has become an expert. When we were calling to set up the appointment, he was doing some kind of conference tour over in Europe, like well respected. And then, you get, we talked about other countries. One of our upcoming episodes, is that next week? It's either next week or the following week. We got a guy coming, literally, this is how God works, right? He just get this call to get one guest, and they're like, hey, but I have this other one you may really, really like too, but it's only going to be in town for 2 days, so you're going to have to record, you should adjust your recording time.
Right.
But this guy is like, over in, I think it's Nigeria, and like his bus got ambushed and everybody basically died but him, and somehow he survived. I can't wait to hear the story. I'm like, God is just doing all this different stuff, but you're right about outside sources. Right. I mean, having that outside source, my guess is most of us started believing and grew in our faith from an outside source. Our parents probably, if we had good parents, they might have planted the seed. Took you to church, you got to hear it, but somewhere along the way, whether it was somebody in the youth group, a friend, maybe it's an author or writer that
maybe it was C.S. Lewis.
That's right. But somebody came along and mentored you.
Yeah.
And in the faith and took your faith and started to help it have roots. And so, I think
it's a community effort.
It is. And I think also that credibility, as I said, behind her matters, because especially today, everybody wants to hear, well, who are you to say that?
That's right. And how many letters do you have after your name? Yeah.
Yeah. Or even if you don't have letters, who are you? And I'm the number one guy on dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I've been spending the last 20 years. There's nothing that's out there that I have not studied, known, and couldn't tell you. And then they're like, so you got to get that credibility. So anyways, all that said, guys, unless you got anything else you want to say?
I don't think so. Other than Josh, I didn't call you Jeff at any time during this talk, did I?
You did. I didn't pay attention. It's all good. I'm called that all the time. I'm called different names all the time.
Well, I know you're Josh, but a second ago I was like, did I just call him Jeff?
You might have. It's no worries if you did. Not a big deal. So there's grace.
There is.
Yep. Thanks, J&J, Jeremy, and Josh, right?
That's right, man.
I'll go by Jeff. I have a bookkeeper named Jeff. He's a good guy. No, seriously. Thanks for listening in. We'll have all the links to Rethink 315 up on the show notes. Be sure to tell your friends and family about the ministry. And make sure you're liking and subscribing for our podcast, so that way we continue to get the word out and allow these great stories to be told to different people. Before I came in here, I noticed we crossed 17,500 subscribers. Not that,
it's amazing,
numbers,
man.
Really,
how long y'all been doing it?
About 6 months.
Dude, that's great.
Isn't it crazy? I'm like, okay, God, that's
a lot to be thankful for.
Absolutely. And it's funny because we do so many different varieties.
Right.
We'll get sports, and I'll notice our numbers go up with certain sports, and then we'll do more faith or more cultural. So it's fun. I love the conversations. But all that said, keep letting people know about our podcast. If they don't like this episode, they might like the next one. On the other hand, maybe you're planting a seed with this episode, and maybe they'll go back and listen and hear something that piques their interest.
I hope so, man. I hope so. Maybe we can pray out to that end. Are you all right?
Go for it. Go for it. You pray.
Praying? Okay, cool. Father God, in the name of Jesus, I pray that I didn't get in the way of anything you wanted to say through our chat today. And, of course, my temptation sometimes is to make a lot of myself, and I don't want to do that here. I want to make a lot of you. So, Jesus, we just both pray. I'm sure Josh agrees with me. We pray that you'd bring glory to yourself, good to us, and good to the people listening to this podcast through this conversation. And if there are ways that we can be helpful, happy to do that. But if nothing else, Lord, I just pray that people listening would come away from this seeing you a little bit more clearly, or at least being curious about who you are, what you've done, and how you relate to us. And just ask, Lord, that you'd soften the hearts of those listening, and that you would reach out to them in ways that make sense to them, that's very personal. And just pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks, Jer.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
All right.
You're safe.